Hey everybody, my name is Carpo, and I'm here to propose a question. Who are we, really? This question has plagued us for as long as man has been around. Sorry, I'm a little bit tired right now, but I think it'll help me to speak a little bit slower. I tend to go a little fast in my videos, and this question of who we are it's kind of become a joke. It's almost like a cliche, like where do we come from, or what if there's aliens or life out there. It's become such a perplexing idea that we kind of beat around the bush with it. We don't really answer the question itself. We don't ask why we're here. We don't ask why we have a consciousness. All these little questions about the big question really only serve to make it more complicated. In other words, the more we learn about who we are, the more complex it becomes. Science has been trying to explain why we're here and how we evolved to the point that we did. And it's done a pretty damn good job explaining all the details of how it happened. But the question of why it happened still remains the biggest mystery. And I was not raised with any particular spiritual or religious belief. My parents were not religious, so therefore I never really had the discussion proposed in my household. As I grew into my teenage years, I started to wonder, what's it all about? I mean, of course, as a youth I'd wondered as a kid too, but when I really started to delve into it, and I started to read a lot about, different theories on life and what they think evolution is, eventually I started to pose this question. I was very opposed to religion even at that time because I saw it as like kind of the easy way out, the shortcut for people to say, hey, I have this answer and it says right here in this book and that's all I need. And I always found that ludicrous, and I said, how can you just believe something in a book? And so I started to question the book, and I said, okay, what is it about this book that really gets people? And I read into the Bible, and I found that it had many interesting ideas, but at that time I really didn't get the gist of why it was created. I knew that there was a reason for it, and I knew that it was important, but I also knew it wasn't meant to be taken verbatim. It wasn't a literal speech. So I set it aside, moved along in my years, and continued to ask the question of why, but I did understand that evolution was obviously something that didn't need to be really argued for. It's obviously, it had happened. It's happening all the time. Animals are evolving, and we don't know why. The fact of evolution, that it happens, it doesn't explain why things randomly mutate. Random mutation, in other words, does not explain evolution. If animals were to just spontaneously have genetic mutations that might help or hinder them, that's great, and that works for evolution, but it doesn't explain how the proper attributes came to be. And the ones that really started to get me were like the bees and the flowers. How particular flowers, when a bee lands on, I believe, the stamen, or the pistil, whatever, the pistil comes out and the pollen touches the back of the bee. So as the bee lands, it basically creates a lever action, pollinating the bee, spreading the flower, spreading the genetics of the flower, and then allowing the bees to prosper. I thought, how can these things co-evolve like this? But then it got even stranger. I started to look into some moths and particular birds that have the displays, the feather displays, but especially the moths that look like, say there's a moth that looks like an owl face. And, you know, if this randomly mutated, and, you know, it's not likely that that particular mutation would really have that much of an advantage because it wouldn't know how to utilize its camouflage yet. Likewise, any insect or animal that mimics another or mimics nature wouldn't necessarily know how to use the new thing it had been given. You know, these are things that are flagrantly used by the animal kingdom, you know. These, say the anglerfish that has the little phosphorescent, it has basically a little thing that comes down in front of its face with a little phosphorescent glow, and it attracts other fish. Well, sure, this could have evolved by chance, but not likely. You know, all the different things that an octopus can do. Okay, so these are all the examples that went through my mind. How can something evolve without something directing it? So this leads one to start researching into the idea of intelligent design. Instantly, you're cursed with the idea that intelligent design has been taken over by religious sects and utilizing that name and basically, you know, tarnishing it with the idea that it really means that God created the earth 6,000 years ago, yada yada. So those of us are on this spiritual quest to find the real meaning of the Spirit and the names behind these things and the reasons. Start to find these patterns and start to understand that there's a code given to us to explain who we are and why we're here. But it's so complicated to decipher that it leads me to wonder if it's really the intention of humans to look for these things at all. In other words, it's obvious that humans have been given a consciousness for a reason, to use it, to gain as much knowledge as possible perhaps, or maybe not. Maybe it's just to use it to help further mankind and to help one another, and was never designed to be seeking these things. Now, our ancestors paid tributes to you know, various gods, deities, and astrological symbolism through the ages, and they had a very strong belief that there was something beyond us and that there was something deeper meaning for humanity. These were deeply spiritual people that had practices and you know, celebrated the idea of a god or many gods in their own way. Yet they had very simple lives and they lived. And this is something to really consider, because this is kind of what, you know, the root of this is, this little conversation here is that we wonder and wonder about our consciousness and where it comes from, and we figure since we have it, and since we have this knowledge, that we should be able to use it to find as much as possible. But it's starting to look like the more we search, the more complicated things become. In other words, I've watched quantum physics from basically the time when when string theory really became, you know, the big thing, you know, 10, 15 years ago. And then from then I've been watching this whole idea evolve into, oh my good, there's quarks and there's more and there's more and there's more and everything's vibration, but we can't explain how it works. Our knowledge of what's out there and what's in here has exceeded the capacity of our instruments to read it or to understand it. In other words, we are able to prove through numbers and mathematics that certain things exist, like multiple dimensions and dark matter, alternate realities, whatnot. But we can't still yet measure or prove them. So they're instantly cast aside as pseudoscience. So while we're playing catch up with our instruments, meanwhile, a lot of folks have just taken a lot of these things for granted and said, well, these things must be true. Our ancestors wrote about it, and they take that as gospel as well. And we need to just step back for a minute and look at things realistically. The idea of a halo, let's say, just take a halo. It popped into my head. A halo over Jesus or an angel. You know, this idea that a halo represents a torus, or the energy field around a body, or the aura, or however you want to put it, whatever you believe in. We can start to see, okay, there is symbolism behind this, and perhaps this is what they meant, you know. And then, you know, later in life you can start to bring back other things like the Bible, like I did, and start to say, okay, here's, you know, guys like Bill Donahue, who has a great YouTube channel where he deciphers all the different ideas behind the Bible. He basically reads a chapter of the Bible and explains it through the idea of Christ consciousness and awareness and becoming empowered within yourself. So is this true? Who knows? I find a lot of it resonates with me. But all of these different people who say, I have the answer. You can pick and choose little pieces of the ones that resonate with you and create your own belief system, but then people will pick at you and say, hey, and they'll just call you out for doing exactly what you're doing. They're saying, oh, you're just taking the parts that you like. Well, the truth is that they're not always parts that you like, because you have to take the bad with the good. I found it more difficult to see the reality that I may never have the answers than to assume that I have them. In other words, while people may see a person like me who says, oh, life's great, life's grand, blah, 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 everything's perfect, you just have to take it for what it is, they may look at me and say, well, that guy's he's just taking the easy route by saying everything's great and everything's grand. But in my mind, it's much more complicated, and it's much harder for me to refrain from acting out on my impulses when I'm maybe angry or when something bothers me. Retraining my mind and my value system to embrace everything for what it is, because you can't change what something is. You can be aware ahead of time that something's going to happen, perhaps, and maybe do something about it. Maybe you're privy to information that would help a situation before it happens. But most of the time, when something happens, it's happened. That's it. And so we don't really know if things happen for a reason, or if we have these arguments over fate and free will and whether or not we even really make a choice at all. There have been debates in philosophy that went on for, centuries over something as simple as free will. And they basically break it down scientifically to why free will does or does not exist. The example that makes is, how much of a waste of time is that? Or is it a waste of time? Are we using our intellect properly? Who are we? Are we really supposed to know who we are? Are we vain and arrogant to think that not only are the seekers of truth even more ignorant than, say, the religious persecutors that, with the strong dogmatic ties, to think that we might find an answer that's even more true? Because we can find the bits and pieces that work, like, okay, we do have energy fields, okay, people do act in a group, okay, we can see in the animal kingdom they react to magnetic fields, okay, and these are the things that I really believe, that humans react to the magnetic fields of the earth as well as astrologically. It's almost like astrology was just tossed out as a joke, and through the 80s and 90s it was kind of like just one of those horoscope things in the back of the magazine, but now it's coming back strong, because we're starting to see that the ancients had correlations between these astronomical events and human behavior. So perhaps this is something we do need to delve into. Maybe this is something that we do need to be more interested in. A lot of mystics seem to think so. The Cabalistic teachings are based on a lot of this type of stuff, as well as like Manly Hall spoke about this. The Freemasons are very interested in astrology, and Hitler used astrologers to make all of his moves. So it's not just something for the kooks, even though Hitler may have been a kook. But there are strong reasons behind these things, why we have them. So I don't know if we're supposed to use them or not. I don't know if maybe there is something behind the idea that knowledge is bad. Now think about that for a minute. Coming from me, of course, that's a joke. I know that knowledge is good. At least in my heart, I feel that it is. But let's consider something for a minute. A lot of us are convinced that the church is the one that suppressed information and knowledge and said that knowledge is bad in order to keep the people in line, to keep the religion as a control mechanism. But let's consider for a minute that maybe that teaching came from a more ancient teaching, that knowledge is evil when a person spends too much time trying to find God. Perhaps the ultimate sin is trying to find God without, instead of within. Now that sounds ludicrous to a lot of people, I know. And in fact, that just came into my mind while I was talking. This is why I do these videos. It's not something I'd processed yet, so I hadn't really thought about it. So it would be like knowledge being evil was something that the ancients had learned after centuries of philosophy, where they realized that they hadn't gained any more than they started with, and that they'd been constantly told by their hearts and minds to just live and live, to treat one another properly, and to learn who they are, and express themselves as being that facet. I think that we have a reason to be individuals, and that's why I find ego to be one of those things that people debate a lot over. Some people have an image that ego is all about, your false image. And then a lot of folks also understand, though, that there are many egos. There are three egos. There's the id, which is the primal ego, but your facade that you put on is not necessarily, it doesn't have to be your full ego. You need to be a person. You need to be yourself. And I think that each one of us is an individual for a reason, because we have such wildly different personalities. And why would personality exist? Let's just consider personality for a minute. Personality is one of the things that tears people apart, it seems like, more than anything. A good friendship can be destroyed by a personality difference so small. I mean, just think about how many relationships have been destroyed over a person doesn't eat meat, or a person who doesn't like a person's hobby. But think about the more intense ones, like a person who breaks up in a relationship because the other person is not religious or of the same religion. That's a big one. There have been many couples through history who have lived happily in different, religions. Maybe one person is religious and the other person isn't. But more often than not, these end in one person trying to convince the other they're right. And it's very rarely the other person trying to tell the religious person they're wrong. It's the religious person usually trying to convince the other person to join their religion. And often it's a very complicated thing because a couple gets together when they're young. One family's Catholic, one's Jewish, whatnot. And in the end, there's a lot of conflict. And they might end up breaking up or missing out on their life partner just due to a simple difference in religion, when both of them maybe should look to finding an agreement between them on a religion. Maybe create something that works for both of them. But no, they have to hang on to what they've been taught, what they've been told. And this is why I'm opposed to a lot of religious forms, especially most all religious forms, if they cause any conflict between people over what they believe, or if a person looks at a person differently because of what they believe. In other words, if a person believes, if their religion requires them to look down on other folks who aren't of the same religion, then it's invalid as a proper social belief system that, that benefits man, because there's people that are being left out. So we have personality differences that show us that individual ego, individual personality is an essential part of the universe. It's kind of what we're here to do and what we're here to be, but not so far as to let it get out of control. Now, I spoke in a video a while back about standing outside yourself and seeing yourself. And if you know what I'm talking about, it's a pretty amazing feeling, but to watch yourself as you act, and that requires you to have basically three people. You have the physical you that's doing the action, and then the you can see, or like me looking in the camera, but then there's the me that's observing all of it. And when you do that for a little while, you start to see that how funny it is, your little personality differences, and really embrace them, I guess, because I go through a lot of different phases and a lot of different emotions in life, and I think that's all just part of it. And there's no reason for us to fear it, but in the end, it comes down to death, and we die alone with our own beliefs and our own thoughts. And we want to bring people with us. But ultimately, it's a beautiful thing, because we move on to another form, whatever it may be. But in between then, what do? Do we search? What is our consciousness for? And who are we really? Just think about that question for a minute. Who are you? Who are you? Not who do people tell you you are, or who do you have an image of you being in your mind, because people will never see you the same way as yourself, as you do. And the way you see yourself will always be different from each other person. Your two best friends are going to totally see you differently, each one of them. And I think often we have an image that people see us a certain way. But no, each person sees us a different way. And in that way, it's quite a tapestry we have woven here. And I guess we just got to figure out a way to get along. Namaste, everybody.